could everybody name, or a few people name me a example of advocacy, or what you would do to advocate?
Voting.
Put one on the team.
Calling representatives.
Anybody that didn't go on the teach-in, give me two examples.
Calling your representatives.
Calling your representatives. Christina.
Signing a petition.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is lobbying the same thing as advocating?
Absolutely.
Okay, lobbying.
What do you do when you lobby?
You go and you talk to politicians about.
And you advocate.
And you advocate. Thank you. I'm just going to use the word in the definition or whatever.
So nobody has any other ones. Okay, well you might have also mentioned you said calling your representatives. So if you wrote to your representatives, that's another one. Protest, you might have gone down to DC or somewhere else, or occupy, or sleep out's an example of advocating. So because the teaching people kind of messed up a little bit, but the one that people fail to mention the most is voting, and that is probably the most important one, and it's the one that's changed the most over time. All right, so here's the change continuum. It's a little nicer looking than the last time I did it. So, as you see, at CCSJ we have a lot of continuums, a lot of circles, and everything else. So as we start here, it's people advocate for issues, and then we go to people vote in elections, and then bills are created. Once those people are elected, they create the bills. Then we as citizens either advocate for or against the bills, or if there's, there's a lot of bills out there that get passed. The majority of bills that get passed, by the way, are ones that are commemorating post offices and, schoolhouses. So it's like, there's a lot, there's very few bills that actually gain a lot of media presence, and ones that will actually make an impact on our society, and that just makes it easier for us to advocate for them. Reps vote, and they decide whether they want to vote for or against. And the thing is a lot of the times they will vote according to how you voted. So if you voted for their policy ideas, they're going to vote that way. Government institutes policy, so then it's, as with anything, you're going to have people at the local level implementing the policy that's been created. And then, after all that's done, they have to face voters again. So we have to say, okay, well, we like what you did, we like what you voted for, and then, again, it goes back to people advocate for issues, and they say which candidates will represent us the best. And then, again, it goes back to the elections. All right, so the reason we have elections is because we're in a democracy. Democracy sucks because you're free to do whatever. But really it does, because it makes things awkward. These things got changed up a little bit too. When at dinner your grandfather makes that outrageous statement about President Obama because he hasn't been arrested for saying it before. Again, you're in a democracy. Instead of dividing the family, he could be locked up in a jail somewhere in Alaska. Got the reference in the Soviet Union. If you caused too much trouble, they would send you to Siberia. It is such a hassle. You might have the urge to call or write your congressperson about the pothole in the middle of your street. Warning, this may require you to watch only 20 minutes of Teen Mom. My sister said that it's 16 and pregnant, but I didn't bother to change it. So. Okay, choosing your leaders is so hard. You have to make the hard decision whether to go to a polling place anytime between 7 and 9, that's 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., on the first Tuesday in November every 2 years to choose your leaders. We should just have a casual coup every 30. As you see, most of the other countries, a lot of the dictatorships and a lot of countries that are not democracies, they have to take action within, and it's not the voters who decide. And usually it's bloody and violent, and there's wars, and it's just not at all as nice as what we have here. Stories should be easy, positive reads. You might have to read disturbing articles in a newspaper about how Alabama is checking the citizenship status of its elementary school students. Stories should only involve the blessings of the harvest and strong national industries. That's what you would hear in North Korea and the former Soviet Union, and a lot of the other dictatorships around the world. It's all focused on work, 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 making the economy becoming stronger, and not about what's wrong with how the economy is working or how wrong policy is being done. All right, so we've seen this so many times. I'm sure you guys have read it plenty of times. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as people at CCSJ were always like, oh, it's when this was made, it was only for certain people. That only pertained to certain people, which was all men, and only if you were white. So you couldn't be black, Native American, Hispanic, and actually be able to pursue those rights. But the idea was unique and revolutionary, and we should respect the founding father guys for at least their ideas on their face. So while, yes, it only pertained to a certain amount of people at that time, still a pretty good idea if you read it as is and made men and women. And many of the founding dudes believe that all persons should be equal. Today, constitutionally, they are. And why is that? It's because we have to read further, because we never read about the second part most of the time. And that is, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So, I like to say that is the other golden rule, because what it's saying is that we are supposed to advocate for what we believe is the best form of government, what we believe is the best policy. If we see a problem, they're telling us, our founding fathers, almost 200 and so years ago, that we're supposed to react, and we're supposed to vote, and we're supposed to try to change the policy that's going on at the time. They wanted us to replace governments that didn't serve our interests. It is our job to make sure the government ensures equality. As the times changed, we did just that. Alright, everybody says I hate politics all the time, especially when you're at your Thanksgiving reunions. Everybody's like, I can't stand it if my grandfather calls Obama a socialist fascist again. So, people hate politics. The thing is well, I hate you. Because the thing is that if you hate politics, you basically hate yourself. Because, sorry, but we belong to a polity, which is the form or constitution of a politically organized unit. Whether you want to be or not, you are part of a polity. You live in a country where we make political decisions. And so these decisions are going to affect you, no matter whether you want it to or not. You can move to another country, but then that country's going to, their policy, their government's going to be affecting you too. So you can't get away from it. It's too bad. So the idea is that you need to embrace it. It doesn't mean you have to fight about it, argue about it, debate about it, call people names at the dinner table. You just have to embrace it. You have to look at it in the way you want to look at it. You have to try to, find, I guess you could say, your niche in the whole political process. My apology, but progress does happen. So for people that say that politics doesn't do anything, that's also, can't put it in a way, BS. Because back in 1787, we were saying that black individuals in our country were 3/5 a person. Why are we doing that? Does anybody know?
Voting.
Do you know why?
States, like the number of representatives is based on population.
Right. So the idea is that we're not going to let you vote, but we'll count you as 3/5 a person so we can jump up the representation population a little more. So that means that we can have more representation in Congress. So, as we see here, they're being treated less than human. And then we got to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment about less than 100 years later, in which we said that everyone, well, they didn't except women, everyone, all men who are of any race can vote. And I'd say in under 100 years, that's not bad time. I mean, of course, it could always be faster, but that was political action that was being taken. People had, there were 3 amendments, which is, if any of you guys know, is a huge process, and they had to get that passed in 2/3 of the states, and so it was. But I think they did force. Yeah, I think they forced the segregation state. I mean, the states in the South, they actually had to adopt it before they joined the union, so that probably helped out a little more. But the idea is that it does work even back then. But here's some more, and I was going to show you this also. I thought this was really cool. I was just looking up images, but this is after Lincoln freed the slaves. This is what was going on before. This is what's after. And as you see, they're part of our polity. They're being part of society. They have gone from being treated 3/5 human to being part of our society, and it's just a huge jump. And while a lot of things, weren't equal in any way, at least under, the government, well, not the government, under the Constitution, they were to be treated as equals. And so here's 20th century advocacy, because it's, obviously we can relate a little better to 20th century advocacy. And I just don't care, but I'm sure glad they did. Less than 100 years ago, less than 100 years ago, women didn't have the right to vote. And now they do. Now the question would be is, would women care? Would women try, if you were just to get the vote, would you vote tomorrow? Like if let's say they just passed a constitutional amendment yesterday, and the election was in a week, you think there would be 95 to 100% participation? Right. So this was 100 years ago, and over time, it's gone down to about 42% of people that vote. And it's not just women actually vote more than men, so because of that, that's probably contributed a little bit. The same thing is just to be spoken for me. If I didn't have the vote and tomorrow I did, I know that I would be I would be out there anyways. But wow, that was. So, 19th Amendment. I think this is the biggest advocacy moment in U.S. history, and I say that because they were going against people that were. It was 100% men. The government was 100% men, and a government composed entirely of men. Women were given the right to vote. They used all advocacy tools. Well, they did some pretty epic work with advocacy. They marched, they lobbied, they wrote to Congress, got arrested, and yes, created awkward moments at the dinner table. There were a lot of those. And there's a few movies that I've seen about this whole movement, and there were a lot of senators who were, completely opposed to giving women the right to vote. And their women, and then their wife would be out there in front of the White House protesting. And in one case, I think even one was arrested and put in jail, one of the senators who was opposed to it, and I think he eventually decided to come around. But so men went from 100% representation to about 80%. So there is a lot to be done in terms of representational equality. It should be 50-50. That's how it should be, or very close to it. It's the same with race, too. And then here we go. Here's Epic Advocacy Part 2. You see the March on Washington, and it was just. This is when the "I Have a Dream" speech. We'll hear that in a second. We'll hear a snippet of that in a second. And the black community wanted to force the government to enforce its constitution. They wanted to vote freely. Our founding brothers wanted just that. The civil rights movement used nonviolent tactics in a very violent environment to bring effective change. They faced so much adversity. Members were harassed, beaten, and killed by their opposition, but always remained peaceful. They convinced the president, a former senator from Texas, and a majority in Congress to make the politically tough decision to end voter discrimination. They convinced an almost all-white federal government. Kudos to them. You have to think they wanted a voting rights bill passed. That was their number one push. And they were willing to be beaten, killed, and a whole host of other terrible things to get that right to vote. They wanted to vote freely. And today, again, as I said, less than 50% of us vote. And we don't have any, most of the time, 99% of the time, we do not have to face such adversity. So here's the 1965 Civil Rights Act. Before that, I thought we could show, since it's MLK Day, part of his speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
We will keep his dream alive. MixedNation.com. Join now.
So yeah, that's one of the greatest speeches of American history, and it was all focused on advocacy and advocating for the right to vote, the right to live freely, and equality, and for equality. So the 1965 Civil Rights Act was passed, which required states, for example, well, that was the Voting Rights Act, but this obviously made it so that you couldn't have, white-only restaurants, white-only drinking fountains. You didn't have to sit in the back of the bus. So many, the list just goes on and on. But that ended it, at least lawfully. And another component of this was the Voting Rights Act, which required states that had a history of discrimination in terms of voting. They were required to report to the Justice Department their different voting propositions in order for them to be approved, so that they could make sure that no one's rights were hindered. I guess I'll give you an example. Sometimes they would gerrymander the districts so that every district would have a white majority, even though 20 to 25% of the state would be black. So they would gerrymander the state so that there would be a white representative in every district no matter what. And so this law made it so you had to have minority districts. So if you had 20% of the state, then at least 20% of your representatives needed to be black or have a black majority. So Johnson did this out of, this is what has to be done. This is a moral and ethical issue because he was from the South, and the Democrats, his party, controlled the South at that time, and so he said, if I'm signing this, I'm signing away the South for the next 50 years, and it was true. Have you ever seen a Democrat win even half of the southern states? No, and so it's still even having a lasting impact on our country today. And so I was like, I had this in the last slide because I always think it's really cool that we went from, in 1965, we had the Civil Rights Act passed, and then only about 80 years before, about 90 years before this, we had the 19th Amendment. We had the two major candidates running for president were black man and woman. So that just shows you that politics can change, People's opinions can change, and politics can make a difference. 50 years ago, that wasn't possible. People of politics made it possible. They advocated for the right to participate in the greatest form of advocacy, which is voting. And yet people don't seem to believe in the power of political change. They don't take advantage of its most important tool, which is voting. Okay. And believe it or not, we still have voting issues today, and so we're going to watch a quick video about that. That's me.
This is not a voter ID bill. This is voter suppression. It's voter disenfranchisement. This is voter confusion. This is voter
By the time,
restriction.
Mr. President, the senators in the outer ring are done with the session, it's going to be easier to carry a concealed weapon than it will be to register to vote in the state of Wisconsin. That's a simple fact.
The question before the House is concurrence. The clerk will call the rolls. You're out of order. Take your seat. Continue the roll call. We have 19 ayes, 5 noes. The bill is concurred in. Senator. Remember those words. Today, Republicans in the state Senate rammed through their highly restrictive voter ID bill. The measure requires voters to show a voter ID when they're heading to the polls, and you know who it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the young, the poor, minority.
I've went all these years without a birth certificate. Well, now I start reading in the newspaper, you know, that the new was going to be that we had to have a card, and that there was 5 items that you had to have to qualify. So then I took my baptism certificate and marriage license, social security card, and I went down to the motor vehicle department and got, I might just will say, thrown out. I told them right out that I did not have a birth certificate. And she didn't say anything that, you know, that I couldn't go on or anything. And then I went to the next station, and when I handed my baptism certificate to her, she just took it, left it lay on the table, and picked it up and handed it back to me, and she said it isn't legal. I enjoy it. I really do, because you find out all of what's going on. You know what the village has to put up with, and what the expenses are, and what you can expect, and everything. My salary from the day that I have started I've been purchasing Christmas decorations. I've always enjoyed Christmas decorations. That's what we do at Christmas, is go from place to place and view the lights. That's our fun time. I could get a birth certificate for the $20, but then after that, if I don't still know if it would be what the motor vehicle department wants. I've been told that that my father's last name is spelled wrong on it. My mother's first name is spelled wrong. So I don't know exactly how much of it is right or wrong. So then if there's any other changes that they want, well then we have to start paying. And I was told it could be up to $200 that we might have to pay for me to have a correct birth certificate. So I may lose it. I may never vote again. I don't know. I hope not. But I mean, I just don't agree with it. I think it's foolish.
This is not a voter ID bill.
By the time
This is voter suppression.
in the outer ring are done.
So what Wisconsin and a few other states have passed is that you have to have a photo ID to be able to vote. And a lot of you would probably say, well, that probably stops voter fraud. Well, most of these states haven't had, most states haven't had a voter, ID requirement. And when was the last time you heard of voter fraud? What? Well, it happens so rare that there's really no reason to have such a bill. People are not trying to go in to vote in twice. And they've asked, I've seen this on television, they've asked some of the people that voted for it, can you name me one incidence of fraud in your state? And they'll always say, oh no, I can't. Or they'll try to get around it, and then they'll say, but it could happen. And so even if it happens, it's so rare, and you're obviously making people that don't have cars, they have to get IDs now. People that, as this woman did not have a birth certificate, so she can't vote. You have to have, they said 5, you had to have 5 things to vote in Wisconsin. So it's kind of disturbing to think that, even voter suppression is happening right now. Okay. Can you guys name me like a few influential people that you feel that you look up to when it comes to social justice? I mean, it's a question we ask all the time here at CCSJ. If you could just name a few, like one, just their name. Help me out here. Gandhi. Yeah. Teresa.
The full-time star.
Rosa Parks.
Medgar Evers. Thich Nhat Hanh.
There you go. The thing is that all these people held a political capacity. Now, the thing is that political capacity does not mean that you have to be an elected official. It just means that you want to have an impact on the current form of society. And so if you look at Gandhi, fought non-violently for more rights, but he never held a political position. You had Dorothy Day, who spoke out a lot about poverty, and her famous quote, her famous quote is, if you help the poor, you're called a saint. If you ask why they're poor, you're called a communist. And she pointed that out a lot because she would get a lot of criticism from people in the hierarchy, people in the government, when she started criticizing the policies that were making people more impoverished. And then Mother Teresa obviously spoke out about a host of different issues, global poverty, abortion, different issues. So she tried to make an impact too. And so this is what people complain a lot too, and that's the next segment of this, is that people like to say that everything's wrong, they don't like what's going on. 28%, we're headed in the right direction. It's pretty bad. So more than 70% of Americans don't think that America is going in the right direction. That's unfortunate. 13% of us approve of the current Congress. That means about 87% of us either have no opinion on Congress or disapprove of it. And yet, only 42% of us vote. So the thing is if you're going to complain, if you're going to have issues with Congress, if you're going to have issues with where we're headed as a country, then you have an obligation to vote. And it's that simple. And so the big question is, can you name me one problem, one issue, and here it is. Second, can you name me one side of the problem that wasn't caused, impacted, or aggravated by our government? I'll give you 10 seconds. Okay, that's right, 0. So the thing is that by not voting, the status quo is automatically endorsed. The only way it is adjusted is by political action. And Leah helped me out with this, and I thought it was really cool. So I was really colorful with this one. They're all like pretty dull, except for this one. Service site. You obviously hear a lot of things at your service site about the issues that people are facing, the problems that are are going on in their society, in their environment, and a lot of that could be adjusted or addressed by Baltimore City government. And a lot of issues in the Baltimore City government could be adjusted by the Maryland state government. And a lot of the issues in our state could be adjusted by the feds. And so you have to look at it as the bigger picture. Like, if I'm trying to serve these people at this service site, I need to ask the question of where are these problems coming from? Where are these problems not being addressed? And you're going to always get back to something larger. It's not just your service site. There's something else there. And people then ask, so after I say, okay, you should feel really bad about yourself for not voting or being registered to vote, they ask me, well, am I informed enough? And so this is a segment I didn't have the last time, but people did bring up. And by asking this question, you are headed in the right direction. You want to form your individual opinion on different issues. And here's the thing. Most of the time, people form their opinions by their parents. They form their opinions by their friends, or their administrators, or their teachers, or the list goes on and on. But by asking the question, am I informed enough, you're saying that you want to form your own individual opinion. You're not sure that everything you've been told is right. You want to find out for yourself. And that's excellent. You're not, if your grandfather said, I always use grandfather. If your grandmother would use unjust language, and you just said, well, if she says it, then I should say it, or my mother said it, so I should say it, then you are uninformed, because you're not asking that question. So by doing this, by being informed, you can keep up with current events, you can pay attention to the issues that surround our service sites, local level, small scale current events. You can pinpoint the societal problems, examine the various solutions and perspectives. That looks really complicated, maybe, but the thing is that you can usually pinpoint the societal problems right on their face. So let's name a few right now. And I can name a couple right off the top of my head. Marriage equality, that would be a societal issue. Poverty, societal issue. Healthcare reform. Homelessness. All right, so we've already pinpointed some issues right now. And then by examining the various solutions and perspectives, and you can take, obviously, what you get from your service sites and what you get by watching the news, and that's what we're talking about now. Isn't all the news biased? Yes, but that's because we are all human. No matter what we write, it's always going to be biased, and that's just the facts. Every one of us has an agenda, good or bad, and we can always say who has a bad or good agenda, but everybody has one. We must use our brains to critically review this biased information in order to understand it better. Who wrote it? Do they have any class affiliations that would have impact on their writing? If someone writes this whole thing about how Obama's a socialist and is completely changing the fabric of society, and we're all going to, our country's falling apart, Google the person's name if you have qualms about it. Fact of the matter is, he probably worked for a Republican administration, or he has a long history of writing conservative literature. It's really not that hard to find out whether the person's biased or not. And does a writer's theory have any facts to back it up? If there's facts there, the more facts they have to back up the theory, the less biased it is. Just use your critical reading skills. Come on, that's why we went to elementary school, that's why we went to high school, that's why we went to college, is to critically review everything. Because you can't just say, it's fact. We've been brought up, we've gone through school to say that nothing is fact in terms of opinion. You have to look into it. So I think we just don't want to critically read. All right, so big question number 2. It sometimes is black and white. Everybody says science is just way too complicated, and I just can't look at this issue. The thing is that science is black or white. If you look at marriage equality, for example, we're at a point now where if you can't decide whether you're for or against it, you know, it's just I mean, you just have been living under a rock. Because the fact of the matter is that it's not really that. There's only the same. I mean, it's just basically my religion says this, or I believe in procreation, or I believe that everyone has the right to marry, no matter whether they're, you know, straight. And so you just have to look at these those simple arguments, and it is black and white. You're either for it or you're against it. Read or watch news that is obviously siding with one end of our political spectrum. Watch Fox News and then watch MSNBC. You'll hear completely different things. You'll have Fox News comparing Obama to Stalin, and then you'll go to MSNBC and they'll compare George Bush to Hitler. So there's a lot of extremes there. By doing that, you can sort it out a little better, and you can try to find yourself usually in the middle. That's where I usually find myself. Read or watch news sources. Use your brain. Determine which viewpoint seems more attractive to you. If you despise both, think up an alternative viewpoint or look to the middle. To feel informed, it usually takes a while. As long as you feel the need to be an informed citizen, a routine will eventually form. It grows on you. You can subscribe to CNN breaking news updates. Just, you know, read the headline and look over the article for 10 seconds, and you will continue to be informed on current events. As long as you know as long as you keep informed on current events, you will feel more and more informed. Like I said, mixed up. Yeah. Politicians suck. You hear that one sometimes. That excuse, I hear that all the time. Loophole. It's not all about dirty politicians. There are questions on every ballot. Whether you want this whether you want this new industry to get a permit, whether you want a new school to be built, whether you want the fines to be adjusted on a certain if you break a certain law. There's your excuse to vote. You know, it's not politicians, it's yes or no answers. And it shouldn't take more than an hour to review the pros and cons for the ballot questions. If you can't answer the yes or no questions, leave the whole thing blank. At least you made the effort. A blank ballot is better than none at all. That's why I tell people all the time. I say, if you go in there and you can't vote for anybody, that's unfortunate, but, you know, at least you made the effort. At least you participated in the voting process. So here's back to the change continuum, unless you forgot it. And I'll send this. I'll probably send this whole presentation out to everybody. But so why this presentation? All right. So then we have the reflection questions, as with everything else. How does voting and the mission of CCSJ overlap? You have to participate.
By voting, you can advocate for people that we serve.
I think it speaks to the justice side of our mission rather than community service.
Absolutely. Okay. Reflection. What does the role of voting in our democracy play in our individual lives and the lives of those whom we serve in Baltimore and throughout the world? Okay, we have 5 minutes. So that means everybody has to go around and just state in a sentence the answer to one of these questions. It's not national, it's either local or yourself. Catherine?
So I think that as far as my individual life goes, voting makes me feel that I have a voice in our society, and especially like lobbying during the teach-in, it made me sort of see how easy politics can be. And I always thought of it as this sort of like abstract thing that like I wasn't invited to play a personal role in, but now I know that it's a lot easier than I thought, and that my government actually wants me to be involved and to vote and to use my voice in that way.
Okay, so I think of voting as that next step to, like you said before, to implement justice. So we can all make small changes on the local level through our
the roads I drive on. You can say that's that's a role democracy playing in our lives. The healthcare I get. There's a long list of different issues we can talk about.
I think it's important that we vote because we need to pick stuff, like I need to vote for stuff that I'm passionate about and that I care about, because I like the part, like 13% approve the Congress. Like I can't complain if I don't vote. I just like that part. That's very true.
I feel like many people, when you hear voting, you think of like just the presidential election and the main election. A lot of people don't realize that there's like so many other things that you can voice your opinion in, that like voting just doesn't come down to the presidential election.
I guess with voting, when I first started getting more involved with being, I guess, politically aware, when I started calling my representatives for the DREAM Act last year, and it just kind of held me accountable and made me realize that like I'm an adult now and I can do, like, my voice matters and not just under my parents anymore.
Something, just the question that like struck with me is just like even through my role this year working with education and like mentoring of kids in Baltimore, I like have read just more stuff about like Stephanie Rawlinsworth, is that her name?
Yeah.
That's the mayor of Baltimore City, and like her views on education and like taxes that she wants to implement to benefit education. So I don't know, it doesn't directly affect me, but I just like recognize how those policies that she puts forth for this city affect like the kids that I then serve.
I think voting lets people have their voices heard, both us and people that maybe wouldn't have the time or capability to do other forms of advocacy.
I've already said it down earlier about how most talking about the presidential election, and I think that voting is really important to start on the local level because you can see those changes being implemented faster, whether it's like from a really small town where I'm from or even Baltimore. You see like just like the change that voting can do.
Voting is one of my favorite activities. I wish I got to do it more often. I
Every 2 years.
am I love voting so much because I am often struck by the fact that females were not given the right to vote until the early 1900s, and that's just ridiculous. And then a lot of people around the world don't have the right to vote in their governments. And, it is a huge privilege, and I don't understand why people don't do it. It's great.
I guess personally, I used to not really think that my voice would matter, like in high school. And then like actively like learning and like reading the news and being informed, I kind of like the power of it and like feeling like I do have a say.
And just off that, that's probably something I should add on here. Is just like my vote won't matter in terms of the numbers. But if any of you guys are following Iowa caucuses, Mitt Romney beat Rick Santorum by 8 votes. Like literally 8 votes. There, so 8 people, 8 of us in Iowa had voted in a different direction. The whole thing would have changed, and the whole who would have been the nominee would have completely changed. So, one way to look at it.
I think the whole idea of like just even if you don't feel that you agree with like a particular news source, but kind of being able to look at it in full and like understand the bias in it is really important. Because like I didn't come from a family that really like was very open-minded to different sources of news, and like even when you watch it and you don't necessarily feel like you agree with it, as long as you can understand the bias, you can still like there's something from it.
I really like your slide or what you talked about the blank ballots. I didn't realize you could go in and do that. That's just
I hope
something
you can.
I didn't know.
I haven't given it a try. I don't know anybody who's done it before. So.
But also going in and just doing like the yes or no questions or something like that. So
yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. So even if you can't decide, at least you can make your voice heard about the issues.
Right.
Yeah, I think sort of what you said about how democracy sucks. Like, personally, I don't agree with a lot of the way the government works, but it's sort of what you have to deal with at this point. sort of make your voice heard and affect change, even if it's not something you can necessarily get on board with. So.
Pretty much going off that, the policies affect us, so the only way to, not the only way, but a good way to make change happen or advocate for what you believe in is to vote. Thank you.
I guess for voting, I've never been very informed with politics, so I guess I don't even know what my voice really is when looking at it. So I feel like I should be more informed and make a decision about what I believe in. I'm sorry, I don't know much about politics.
It's fine.
You're
on a journey.
On a journey, yeah.
Oh my
What
yeah, I can't believe you said that.
Lean into discomfort. I got into a political discussion with my family probably every day. And then I would see like a new family member and then we start talking about politics again. And it's like, I guess it made me realize that everyone does have their own opinion, and it's through voting and voting for the things that you are opinionated about that you can enact change. And I mean, personally, I've seen like the role that the immigration laws and the healthcare laws are now playing in the lives of the people that I serve at Caravan, because it's all interconnected, and like it's really obvious to see in the cycle of poverty like how everything is connected with the stuff that's going on right now, like in the debates and in the world.
And I think something to grow up that also is that we need to look at, while charities and organizations might be able to make an impact and compete with government in making an impact on like local societies, when it comes to like international things, it's something I didn't really touch on, but international things, so war, humanitarian aid, there's only one avenue to that, and that's the federal government. So that gives you another reason to look at, like, our government has complete control of that, basically. I mean, there are charities, of course, that do humanitarian aid internationally, but when it comes to like war and that kind of thing, there's really nobody else who can decide for us.
I think democracy allows individuals to act with their freedoms towards their convictions. So whether or not they can vote, like I was just thinking, people who were formerly incarcerated, or even the young who aren't of legal age yet to vote, they still very much have a voice within this democracy. Yeah, so I think democracy gives you more the freedom, which I think is good.
And as you guys know, like, younger voters didn't used to have the right to vote either. If you were from 18 to 21, they changed that in the 70s after with the whole Vietnam. They were like, well, if I can go out and fight for my country, why shouldn't I be able to vote? So at 18, you can vote. That you didn't used to have that right, so you can look at it that way.
I guess just in terms of the role of voting, it's not just like that Tuesday in November, so especially over break, just hearing so much dialogue amongst like people I know and then on the news, and it's just an opportunity for a lot of dialogue and kind of forced hurriedness to the election.
I thought the slide about keeping informed was interesting, because I know for me, voting is a lot of the reason why I keep informed, because I like to vote, so when I go into it, I want to make sure that I'm making the right decision, so I like to do my research before
I just think that voting is an important step into becoming an active member of the society.
I keep thinking about the common good, and I feel like voting, if we care about the common good, it's one of, if not the best way for us to provide for the common good, and especially in terms of fiscal decisions, funding for urban schools or for prisons, and those are really concrete decisions we can make through our vote.
And I also want to close with this, because this is another big issue that people always
which political party do I join, or do I have to be a Democrat and I don't want to be a Republican, that kind of thing. Independents are the largest voting bloc in our country, and you sometimes don't hear that. You don't hear that often, enough. But Republicans and Democrats, parties by themselves are minorities. It's the independents that decide the elections. It's the independents who don't. So when people say, "Well, I don't know if I want to be an independent," because how much impact they have is enormous impact, and you'll be in the majority.
Except in primary elections.
And that was something. I can also touch on it. If you need to examine which political party you need to join. That's something you need to look into, because if you're in a state like Maryland, the only election that really matters. They both matter, obviously. That would completely destroy my whole argument. The election that makes the most impact on who wins is the primary election, because it's a very Democratic state. Oklahoma, very Republican. So if you are a Democrat, if you're a registered Democrat, you have more of an impact on who becomes the next person to represent your state or your district, because you can vote in the primary election. You can decide which Democrat is going to run against the Republican, or vice versa. So that's something else you should also look into, is which party you want to belong to. Do you want to be an independent? There are other parties out there: Green Party, Libertarian, long list. So just look into that. You can be unaffiliated, I believe, which means you're not even independent, you're just there. So that is the end of the presentation, and I think we're doing lunch now.